In this final demonstration in the local ridge series, we will simply show what it's like to do a lap down the local ridge. In this case, we're going to talk about some of the landmarks and kind of reinforce, well, how a typical flight on the local ridge would be like. The reason that we're doing this last and not first is that, well, when everything is working, when you're prepared, when you have the underlying knowledge, you'll find it's actually pretty simple. On a decent day after having tested the ridge, with the wind pretty perpendicular, moderate strength of about 16 knots or so at ridge top, everything works nicely. We have some nice decent thermals, and all that's great. And so now that and with all of the kind of situational awareness and all the skill and all the thoughts that we've discussed over the past number of videos, now we're finally prepared to fully take advantage of the conditions. So let's go. So right now we are abeam the upper reservoir. We have tested the ridge. We've done the whole process of flying, of towing up, assessing what was going on, and testing the thermals, testing the high band, testing the low band, and finally, after maybe spending 30-40 minutes, an hour, however long we would like, we finally are now down on the ridge going 70 knots and having a great time. We are now heading toward the Delaware Water Gap, and we're going to be heading along there with the golf course, their only emergency landing option. So if we turn on the turn points, it's going to be straight 12 o'clock, that golf course on the island. And that's Sunfish Pond, nice little landmark, of course. As we get a little bit beyond Sunfish Pond, now we're going to back off because the ridge is going to sink on down lower and lower, and we're not going to want to follow the ridge all the way down. So we're doing really nicely, about 80 miles an hour. That's a bit fast for a beginner, I would say, but in the interest of the video, we'll keep the speed up. And so this here is the campground. This is oftentimes a pretty nice thermal source. And right about here, we're going to go and start floating our way up. We're going to choose, let's say, we're going to get a little higher here. Ideally, we'll float our way up to 2,000 feet. As we slow down, we pushed away from the ridge because the sweet spot pushes away with altitude. And we're doing very nicely, we're still climbing. It's a very nice day. And now we're at 2,000 feet. Very nice. And we'll float along at this altitude until we get to the end of the ridge. So looking down, you can see the what I like to call the clubhouse, and that's on the part of the golf course that's on the mainland. And that also oftentimes will have a nice thermal coming off straight downwind of it. In the future, when you might be thinking about crossing the water gap, that's oftentimes where I would pick up my thermal before crossing the gap when I was flying a 126 as a beginner. So we're floating along very, very nicely. Again, we want to be nice and high up here because the ridge pretty quickly settles down lower and lower. It's about 1,200 feet high at the gap proper. And once you get pretty close to that turn point there, and if you're in there low, it's not pretty. Now today we're not going to be heading any further, but this is the Delaware Water Gap, kind of the imposing jump in the distance, and basically this is the end of the local ridge. We don't go beyond this point until we're cross-country ridge approved. Now, looking down, you can see, if you look off to the right, that you're looking out toward East Stroudsburg. There's actually a nice flag out, a tall flag in the distance, and I always like to look at that when I come out down here to as a wind reference. Alright. Now we went off the end of the ridge, and that's why we're in sync, so we're going to go and turn around. As a beginner, you know, in the beginning, you'll make your turn maybe directly over the ridge, but then every day, when I was doing lots and lots of laps up and down the ridge, every time I try to float up a little bit higher and go a little bit further into Pennsylvania, as we just did, and I always felt that was good practice. The other thing is, there's nothing stopping you from picking up a thermal in this area and exploring upwind a little bit, if so long as you are very comfortably in glide of the ridge to come back. And now we're starting to pick up the ridge band again. Very nice. As we're heading northeast bound, we're keeping the golf course in our back pocket, but then we're monitoring our glide angle to the field at the base of the ridge by the upper reservoir. That turn point just left of 12 o'clock. And basically, you know, we're basically hopping from one field to the other. At this point, we can go and drop back down onto the ridge because we're approaching the campground. And in this video, I'm flying pretty fast. I'm largely doing this to basically just keep things rolling along. But when you fly the local ridge, fly at 50 miles an hour comfortably at 2,400 feet. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's but, you know, if you want to go and practice a low level of fast ridge flying, this is a very nice section to do it. Passing by the upper reservoir. And once we get to the upper reservoir, now we're going to start thinking about the catfish jump ahead. So we're going to be flying the whole length of the local ridge. And so at this point, we're going to start slowing down. So that the near pole about 1 o'clock, that's what I like to say is the end of the strict local ridge, meaning the area in which beginners can fly also extends to the northeast, to the Catfish Ridge, and we'll call that the section that beginners can fly as the local ridge. But then sometimes when we say the area that is, you know, that's the nearest to the airport, the best section of the ridge, we'll also call that the local ridge. And I disambiguated by calling this section the strict local ridge. reason that we call the next section the Catfish Ridge is because the next kind of distinctive landmark is called Catfish Pond, and that's the following turn point in the distance there. We'll get a better look at Catfish Pond when we get a bit closer. And so we're nicely floating along, getting some extra altitude for this jump. And we're going to take a good look at the fields to the left, and we also have the fields at the base of the Catfish Ridge in the distance, which is good. So now we have an out in case this transition does not work out very well for us. Alright, I've located my little gully over there. In real life, I'd be expecting a line to be coming from there. And as a reminder, we are not going to be heading further into the Catfish Pond area because that section is shadowed, it's unlandable, doesn't work very well, unsafe to be there. And as we've started our jump, we're probing along, making sure that things are working out okay. The air is okay. It's a little bit sinky, but we're still maintaining our altitude very nicely. Excellent. Even bumped into a little bit of a thermal. Still comfortably in glide over our fields. We maintain our altitude going into the wind, which is excellent. And we're going to just keep going up this line. Why not? Punch into the headwind a little bit more. Okay, now we've got well upwind of our desired location. We can actually now have a bit of a tailwind component angling into the ridge. Along the whole way, because we were going across pretty high, we had the ability to turn around and go back if we hit, some vicious sink or something like that. We never got so low that we couldn't get back. And so now we are connecting with the Catfish Ridge. At this point, the fields off our left are our landing options. The ridge is working so well that's not even letting us get down on it very quickly. And so the limit of the area in which our beginners can fly in, the local ridge, to the northeast is the Millbrook power line, which is the next turn point over there, and you can very clearly see the power line in the distance. The ridge beyond it is called, we call it the Millbrook Ridge, and you'll see some of the more experienced guys fly up in there. The ridge actually does work. It looks terrible. It's amazing that it does. It very much kind of looks like a box canyon. But the nature of the terrain out here is that ridge does work very well. That being said, it is not very landable up there. The only landing options are behind us, so it's a pretty sporty place to be. And so we strongly recommend that our beginners basically turn before the Millbrook power line. So we're just about approaching the bit here, and right over here, the Catfish Ridge, there's a little bit of an offset to the Millbrook power line, and so oftentimes we'll just turn before we get to the little offset. So now we're heading southwestbound once more. Heading back to the local ridge, over to the upper reservoir. The fields at the base of the Catfish Ridge are solidly in glide. We're in good shape. At this point, we're now going to start slowing down again, because we're going to start working our way up for the downwind jump at Catfish. We're slowing down a little bit, pushing out in the band to find that sweet spot at the higher altitude. Catfish Pond off our left. As we're doing this, as we're setting ourselves up for this jump, we take a good look at the field at the base of the local ridge. That's going to be our out. And so long as we're in good air, we're going to keep floating along, going straight. Because if we're doing just fine going straight, then there's no reason to kind of put ourselves into that corner. So in this case, we're just sort of probing along into the wind, and just sort of staying in this good air. And if it stops, then we're just going to angle right off to the left. We're plenty high now to make this downwind jump. If you're in good air, stay in it. Okay, at this point we'll start angling downwind. This worked out very nicely. That corner is always a little bit scary because it's got a long ways to go to get to that field, but now that we floated along in some good air, now we were able to kind of cut the corner and make a straighter line to the local ridge. Now we've completed our transition. How wonderful is that? And at this point, we have now successfully done a lap along the local ridge. On a decent, nice day like this, with good thermals, with nice solid conditions, yeah, it's fairly easy. But along the way, when we talked about things like the sweet spot, and we talked about things like the transitions, and the fields, and the testing, and all of the concepts that we've discussed, there's a lot of little nuance to what we do and how we do it. Now at this point, we're going to be going and trying to find a thermal and see about trying to get high enough to get back, and at that point we'll call it quits. Now we always turn away from the ridge. And since we are plenty high, more than 400 feet above ridge top, we can take a full turn from the get-go. And at this point, now that we're above 2,400 feet, we can consider going back. But since we're in good air, we'll just stick with it a little while. And now that it's going away, and suppose that we were wanting to go back, we had drifted a couple turns downwind, and now we're a little bit higher, and now we can afford to go. And with that, we would head on back, and in this case, we'd be heading back via the upper reservoir route, lined up with Dairy Queen Field, and lined up with the end of runway 7. And so there you have it. It's very nice flying our local ridge. It's very nice practice. It's a wonderful little ridge, and and go and practice it, have fun with it, and review any of the concepts that may have not been all that clear, or as to what they meant or why we were doing certain things. That's all in the previous videos. And good luck and have fun.